Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Wednesday, May 8th, 2024. Time for another show. Time for an exciting episode. As usual, plenty to talk about today, though not all of it entirely serious, I guess, and some of it more serious than others, and then some serious in ways that you perhaps hadn't realized until today. Well, let's see. Twitter and the social medias are aflame with, well, I don't know what to tell you about this one. RFK Jr., that's in the news. How do we say this? I mean, it's the New York Times. I can just give you the New York Times headline. RFK Jr. says doctors found a dead worm in his brain. Okay. The subheader explains helpfully that the presidential candidate, and apparently he is one, the presidential candidate has faced previous undisclosed health issues, including a parasite that he said ate part of his brain. Just one of those things that happens to presidential candidates here in America. I mean, something has eaten Donald Trump's brain in full, of course. I mean, that guy's out of it. RFK Jr. has kind of been disconnected from reality for quite some time and apparently has had brain parasites, and I don't know what the deal is with this. I haven't read the story, but if you're explaining brainworms, you're losing. Really, that's about it. I don't know what else to tell you about that. Greg says the RFK Jr. vote share just went up. The worm can't vote, Greg. It's dead. It has to be removed from the voter rolls. So we can't have that happening. And wow, I don't know what to tell you about all of that. On the other hand, some other developments that are, I don't know, almost as crazy or just as weird, I guess. In the United States of America, I always thought, just kind of growing up, that one of the things that would happen if you were president of the United States and you decided, I'm going to steal all the secret nuclear documents and maybe sell them to enemies of the United States for huge amounts of money or something like that. And if somebody said to me, you can't do that, you don't want to do that because you'll be prosecuted for doing that. And I would say, no, I won't be prosecuted because I'm a former president of the United States and I'm immune from everything. And if that's not enough, well, then I will run for president again if I have to, and then just make myself immune afterwards. And someone would say, well, but that would take at least 4 years. And or perhaps the Constitution allegedly prevents you from running for a third term. Well, I would, of course, now be able to wave all of that away and just say yes. And true, I'll have to wait 4 years to become president again. But that's fine, because how quickly do you think they would investigate, arrest, and try me for stealing top secret, nuclear secret documents? And the answer is 5 years, apparently, at a minimum. And so there's no way to get in trouble for that anymore. So how do you like that? That's a new and exciting revelation as well. This, of course, Judge Eileen Cannon, appointed to the bench for no particular reason by Trump, and has saved his bacon once again, delaying the trial now indefinitely because it's very complex and hard to administer. So there you go. And she also has no idea how to administer such a case. So I don't know how to do it, so let's not do it, at least until after I might not have to do it anymore. So that seems like a good and sound decision. I think I saw Kevin Cruz on social media, I think Blue Sky, making crack about that yesterday. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find a thing, but just it's as if Trump was handing out federal judicial appointments by firing robes out of a T-shirt cannon at a Trump rally or something. And, you know, as between that and, oh yeah, I did forget to mention the other day that some of the most notorious off the deep end conservative federal judges, Matthew Kacsmaryk, to whom they keep bringing these cases in the Northern District of Texas, and James Ho, who was just in the news for something else almost as egregious as any of that. It was, I think, a circuit court judge joined by a dozen others or so in a letter that, let's see if we can dig the thing up, but stating their intention. This was really interesting. Stating their intention never to hire as a clerk anyone who has now or will later graduate from Columbia University, either as an undergrad or from their law school, because, well, what it comes down to is they disagree with the whole protest situation, and even though, of course, the actual administration of the university cracked down rather mightily on the protests themselves. Something woke, I don't know. They're poisoning the brains of the kids over there, but RFK is the one with a dead parasite in the brain. And therefore, no one from Columbia will ever be hired by, it's a handful of judges. And quite honestly, the likelihood of their hiring certainly no liberal star from coming out of Columbia. But I guess it also may mean that the most conservative students ever to attend Columbia, who may have fought the whole way through proudly as a reactionary conservative at a relatively liberal institution, won't be hired either. But of course, they could just throw that out later on and just say, I didn't really actually mean it. But it was interesting to note the number of federal judges who were willing to engage in collective punishment for a First Amendment protected mode of speech because freedom. It's always good to be able to find out that that's the case. And I saw, I think really appropriately, people begin to say, this is the sort of thing that would put you outside of the realm of good behavior, for instance. The sort of thing that could get you impeached as a federal judge ordinarily, but of course we now know that there is no such thing as impeachment anymore because that's a partisan tool and has been rendered useless by the partisan voting scheme in Congress. Anyway, so, lots of other things going on. Of course, yesterday was Stormy Daniels' testimony, and there's more to come tomorrow. Today is Wednesday. And that means a number of things, not the least of which is that Greg Dworkin is preparing his raft of stories in the background and getting ready to jump in, probably the first breath that I take. There it is. Boom. See? Wow. It's almost, I got to tell you that is not easy to engineer exactly that way either. So that was some excellent timing. And Stormy Daniels will be back tomorrow for cross-examination, which began yesterday, but they need more time for that one because people have a lot of questions, I guess, and it was an interesting testimony. She made it interesting. I think she made it more interesting than the prosecuting attorneys were hoping for. They kind of wanted maybe a more matter-of-fact recitation of things. But the cross-examination was going to elicit this stuff anyway, and probably inadvertently, because she's a hostile witness. And she had a lot to say, more than the judge really wanted her to say. But there are some interesting analyses available of what she has provided to the observers so far, and more to come tomorrow. But today is the break day, and all right, that gives us a chance to focus on and point and laugh, if we wish, at her testimony, at the farting fascist former guy, whatever you want to call him, and we ought to take the opportunity to do it without falling behind any further in trial developments. But Greg Dworkin is here. We'll let him take the reins for a moment and see what's on your mind. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. So should I use a rolled up newspaper to direct things?
I guess so. I don't really know.
Taking the reins,
Yeah. Well,
that'll cost you extra.
I didn't even bring reins. I hope you did.
Yeah, well, yeah. I got a riding crop. That'll do.
Yikes. Well, look, that was a weird encounter.
So
we will examine it later
it's just so funny watching
just
this.
A little bit more. Yeah. What?
And looking at the analyses, not the trial itself, but the analyses between the lawyers who are very buttoned up. This wasn't exactly what we wanted, and I'm not sure. And look at the motion to call a mistrial, which of course failed, but that only says what might happen on appeal.
Mm-hmm. Well,
who GAF about appeal? What's that got to do with
I guess
politics?
that's true. Yeah, people
It
watching
only
the
has
trial.
to do with the law. So maybe
for
the
fun.
lawyers aren't the ones to really analyze this. So then you step back and say, okay, well, let's look at the politics of it. And there's two camps. Obviously, the most and the loudest and most well-known camp is, LOL, nothing matters.
Sure,
And
why not?
leading this camp is a really interesting piece, which is in Politico.
All right.
And it's an interview. It's Politico magazine, which is generally much better than a Politico gossip sheet.
Oh, certainly shinier, I would
And
think.
this is an interview
Do they even
with
print
one
it?
of my favorite sociologists, Sam Perry, who studies religion.
Okay.
And the title is Evangelicals Hate Stormy Daniels but Love Trump. Here's why.
Well, all right. I mean, okay.
Well, it's interesting. Trump may have sinned, but evangelicals still admire his masculinity and power. Sam Perry makes the case that to evangelicals, Trump is a stand-in for Samson. Virile, out of control, but gets it done. And then, okay, if you can't do that, maybe David, because, he had this dalliance with Bathsheba. Or, something like that. There's always these flawed leaders who nonetheless win, and that's what they want from him, and they don't really care about the rest. That's evangelicals. That's not Republicans writ large, but that's a huge portion of Republicans. Those are not the ones we can ever reach.
I guess
Whenever we talk about, what else is going on, it's not them. So they're covered. We understand. Trial doesn't make any difference to them. Conviction won't make any difference to them. And all it does is reinforce what they already think. Okay, but you can't win with those voters alone, so it's everybody else. Everybody else steps back and says, okay, it's a little salacious, it's a little ribald, it's a little over the top, but basically what this trial is doing is setting up mechanism and motive. We talked about that a little bit on Monday.
Okay, yeah.
Mechanism, of course, is the dry stuff. That's where the accountants come in. The cover-up, the using the records, that's why it matters that a check was stapled to an invoice, and Trump looks at all the invoices and wrote in his book that I look at all invoices, I won't spend a penny, I'm a penny pincher, that's how I'm a billionaire. And so the idea that Michael Cohen would get paid double what he asked for and Trump wouldn't notice, And we're also talking about checks of $35,000 that only he can approve from his personal account. No. So, the mechanism is established. And then there's the motive. And basically what Stormy Daniels did yesterday, which we all sort of knew, but she told the story of what Trump didn't want you to know right after the Access Hollywood tape. He didn't want you to know he had a sexual liaison with Stormy Daniels. He never wanted you to know before and after the election that she walked in on him at his invitation to meet for dinner. And when she gets there, he's in silk pajamas and she looks him over and says, "Oh, you stole those from Hugh Hefner?"
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a great story.
Yeah.
But the point is, Trump comes across as a local, used car dealership owner who thinks that, he's a master of the universe on Wall Street and, can run havoc in his own community and nobody can stop him. And she treats him like a jerk because he is a jerk. And it's so recognizable. That character is so recognizable. Not just Donald Trump, but, the loudmouth, middle-aged to older age guy, who thinks he's virile and sexy, and the girl looks at him and says, "Yeah, whatever, I'm here for other reasons." So all of that came through. That's the story he didn't want you to hear, and it got told. And so Trump's lawyers were really upset about this and said, "Oh, there's a mistrial. You can't do this. This has nothing to do with why we're here," they said. "This has everything to do with why we're here. This is the story they didn't want you to hear." And Marchand, the judge, said, "I didn't want to hear all these details, but no mistrial. That's not happening."
Yeah.
It would be well if your client, they said to the prosecutors, would keep the answer shorter. And so after that admonishment, it was more yes, no. And then the cross-examination came, and their goal was to try to paint the picture, which they couldn't do. They failed, but they'll try again on tomorrow.
Yes.
To paint the picture of Stormy Daniels trying to extort Donald Trump for the money.
Seems like you could have extorted a bit more.
She is only doing this for the money, and she said, "I'm a businesswoman. I do this for the money."
Not just a businesswoman, but yeah, I mean,
you just don't understand my business.
Yeah, I mean, if you stop and think about it for a little while, like I don't know if you knew that people got paid for these films, but they do.
Well, that's the thing. One of the really interesting parts about the questioning is when she went in there, and why do you have all these details? I'll tell you why you have all these details. So she goes into this pre-dinner meeting. Trump changes back to regular stuff after she admonishes him. He's wearing regular clothes.
Yeah.
And they have a chat before dinner.
Okay.
What's the chat about? Trump is really interested, she said, from a business point of view. How are the details of how adult films work? Do you have a union? Do you get paid? Do you get tested? Do you use condom? How does this work? And she explains in detail, which the judge didn't want to know. Yeah, I work for a company called Wicked because they're the only company that actually insists on condoms in all their films, and I get tested regularly, and I've never had anything. And then she realizes later the reason Trump was asking that is he wanted to have sex with her, and he's a germaphobe, and he wanted to make sure everything was clean.
Yeah, great.
And she makes that perfectly clear. And, of course, that's part of the story. And so when you go back and listen to that whole thing with all the details and say, well, what are the chances Trump actually didn't have sex? No, not after hearing yesterday.
Yeah,
if you
I guess
thought
that's
about
true.
it before and for some reason had some, as they like to say, as the lawyers like to say, if you had some reasonable doubt about whether he actually had sex, no, not after yesterday.
Okay.
So his defense, I never had sex with that woman, basically what Stormy Daniels did yesterday is say, look, jury, I know you're hearing this and you may not want to hear all the details, but you have to understand that at his core, Trump's a liar.
Yes. Okay.
You can't believe anything he says.
Helps to explain.
And then let the accountants tell you about where the money comes from.
All right.
And let's see what he has to say about it. But I'm telling you now, based on my experience with him, you can't believe a thing he says. He lies about everything. He certainly lied about having sex with me.
Many people are saying that.
So that's what came out yesterday.
All
now,
right.
What are the lawyers going to do? Well, at the appellate level, who cares? That's not what's going on here. I suppose the lawyers care. I suppose it matters down the road. But look, just because you think, because you have an ick factor, that this went over the top and was too much, that doesn't mean the jury does. It doesn't mean the appellate court does. As a real live example, again, I'm not a lawyer, but just look at this in a common sense point of view. Trump's lawyer said this was too much. We want a mistrial. And the judge said, okay, you made the motion. No, denied.
Yeah. Well,
just because you ask for an appeal doesn't mean you win on appeal is what I'm saying.
That's true. And
okay, so
probably...
this was enough to ask for an appeal. Fine, get an appeal. That doesn't mean you win.
Anything's enough to ask. I mean, you just don't get it.
This is just another thing to add. That's what I'm saying. So,
yes.
This just changed everything. No, it didn't change anything.
It is interesting, too. These are the lawyers, the brilliant lawyers who every time they think they see an opening for getting to a victory, walk into a situation where the court says, I want you to read out loud the thing that you said was so terrible. Oh, again? All right. We can't have this juror because they said a terrible thing about my client. What is that thing? Oh, my God, we're so embarrassed. We can't have this witness testify because they said such a horrible thing about or the contempt trial. We shouldn't hold him in contempt because he was only responding to this terrible thing. What's the terrible thing? And now,
again, so
we appeal
Trump's
because
lawyers
of
are doing a good job. It's just that they have a very flawed client and a very flawed case, and there's only so much you could do.
I don't know how great they're doing in terms of
they're
not embarrassing
doing bad.
their
They're doing what
clients.
they're supposed to do. They're raising all the issues
a hopeless
they're supposed
case.
to raise.
So, yeah. I mean, I guess in that sense, well, how would you handle this hopeless case? Well, probably like this. All right. They are doing that. Okay, that's true. I do think that they haven't thought a great deal of it through, and they didn't really realize how easy it would be to force them to do things that would make their own client furious with them.
Well, that's on the one hand, and on the other hand, if they were that smart, they wouldn't have been admonished by the judge on the second day of the trial saying you've lost all credibility.
Also, they wouldn't be there. If they were smart, they just wouldn't be there.
They were really smart, they'd get paid in advance, and if they were super smart, they wouldn't have taken the case in the first place. Yes. I get all of that.
All right.
But they're competent lawyers. They're doing a fine job. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not in a position to judge them. I don't see the lawyers as being the issue. I see the client as being the issue. But as far as Stormy Daniels' testimony goes, she did fine. She got the information that nobody else would have because only she and Trump were in that room. And she established, I think, beyond a reasonable doubt, that if Trump says he didn't have an affair with her, he's lying.
Okay. Yes, that is important.
Right. And then she said, there's several times he called me and I had it was on speakerphone. I had other people in the room. It can be corroborated. I don't know if they're going to bother, but they can. If they want to go that route, I don't think they want to.
Yeah, that's where the lawyers would come in, as opposed to saying, well, we demand corroboration.
We can do that.
But then these conversations will be repeated and they'll tell the jury what I heard your client say to Stormy Daniels on the speakerphone. And the judge is
going to say that's not at the core of the case. We don't need to hear that.
Well, on appeal, I don't know, but maybe. But although I don't know, I'm not certain that the judge would prevent that if Trump's attorneys require this corroboration and call those witnesses themselves in order to cross-examine them.
So I'm going to try to mimic a lawyer and pretend I understand what I'm saying, which I really don't.
No.
And the judge is going to say, "Are you trying to tell me that these are probative and not prejudicial discussions?"
Yeah,
I rule against you. And what that means is that really adding something to the case that's really going to help us decide the issues, or is it just salacious? And I say it's just salacious, so I rule no.
Oh, I would say, and then I'd ask for a sidebar and say, Your Honor, that would be a fantastic ruling if the people had called this witness. That's not our witness. That's a defense witness. You're telling the defense attorneys that they can't pursue the line of questioning for their own witness. I mean, that's fine, but you should have ruled that earlier and told them, you're an idiot if you want to call this witness.
And the judge is going to say to them, look, if you really had an issue with all of this, you would have objected earlier. Oh, wait, he did tell them that.
Yeah, so
when Stormy Daniels was going on and on about the details, they didn't object.
Yes.
Why? Because they wanted to do this mistrial thing, and the judge said, I see you.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying, like, if you needed to have, like the people, the prosecutors aren't going to ask for corroborating witnesses to come and say, I heard this conversation. If the
I get that the defense has the ability to do that over and above what the prosecution has. What I'm saying is the judge says, I see what you're doing. I've already told you you've lost all credibility with the court. We're not doing this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the instruction would be, you're losing your case by calling these. You can call them if you want to.
Let me explain it to you.
Yeah. I mean, you can call them if you want to. I'm saying that if the prosecution called them, I would say it was impermissible. Are you sure you want them as your witness? I might tell you, no, you can't, because I don't know why, just to save you from being disbarred.
Right. Exactly.
No. But if you insist, I mean, I'd hate to see what the appeal looks like when you appeal from my decision to bar you from bringing the witness that will kill you.
There was so much going on with yesterday's testimony. It has nothing to do with the case, and yet has everything to do with the case. And so the reason it has everything to do with the case is this is Trump's world. And Trump's world, with all of these different discussions, which are about what can I get away with? What should I do? I'm not talking about doing the right thing. I'm talking about how's it going to play. That's Trump's world. And so that world was presented to the jury. If they didn't understand what Trump's all about after yesterday, they surely do.
Okay.
You can say, as the political people, Joe Scarborough was on this morning, I don't know if it's going to make any difference because this, that, and everything else. We'll get to that. It certainly does. Look at Indiana. What does that mean? I'll tell you in a minute. But the jury is paying attention. They're rapt.
It is their job.
It's their job. They are hearing all of it. And right now, it's the jury that matters. That's the audience, not the political world. As far as the political world goes, by the way, Forget about the polls. Look at actual voting. There was a Indiana primary yesterday. Let's just give you the political headline. Unexpected warning signs for Trump in busy Indiana primary.
Busy.
Yeah.
All right.
In a primary that saw a record-breaking $98 million splash across the state, Tuesday was no exception, but a zombie Haley candidacy continued to punch above its weight in the Trumpiest of states. The former South Carolina governor is on track to break 20% for the first time since she dropped out of the race 2 months ago. Her share is actually going up as we go along.
That is interesting.
Yesterday, she got 21.7%. Donald Trump got 78.3%. He couldn't break 80%.
Wow.
In a primary that's already been settled.
Yeah.
Well, this doesn't mean it. Yeah, it does.
Because
it's like every primary. People are telling you there's a healthy chunk, whatever that number is, of Republicans that don't really feel comfortable voting for him.
That is, that guy that he was going to hang, he was the vice president.
Yeah, in this trial, that won't make a difference. Well, okay, fine. It'll just reinforce with those voters who don't want to vote for him that maybe they don't want to vote for him.
Okay. But but
it'll reinforce the ones that do. Fine, but that's not even 80% of an Indiana primary.
I guess not. And I'm pretty sure that's where that guy was from.
Folks.
That's true. We're not. I assume that the guy he wanted to hang, Mike Pence, is still relatively popular and influential there.
That should have been a ballot question, right? Should we hang Mike Pence?
Yeah, that was a ballot question just yesterday, and apparently 20% of the only 20% of the
21%
Republicans just said, that's probably a bad idea. We shouldn't do that. Yeah. We should hang his brother. That's a possibility.
No, don't hang him. We'll lose on appeal.
Oh, well, maybe. Hang him in pajamas.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, a.k.a. Darwin_Darko, a.k.a. the most reasonable man in America, a.k.a. KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio for a cross-examination, I guess. We're back for our second installment. I don't know. Maybe we're done with Stormy Daniels for the day.
Maybe we're not. I don't know.
But I have more, but we'll wait.
Well, the thing is, there have been a whole lot of people who have claimed that this is a weak case and really never should have been brought. It's certainly from a what did you do, why did you do it point of view, the weakest of the four cases.
Oh, yeah. Compared to stealing
national secrets
storming
and
the
trying to overthrow the government.
Yeah. Sure.
I get that. But it's not a weak case in and of itself standalone. It's actually a pretty strong case that the state prosecutors have put together, the Manhattan DA, and it hangs together. Now, there's nuances and quirks in New York state law that allow this case to come forward, such as it's a misdemeanor to fake business records.
Right.
And it's a misdemeanor
should be more
to conspire to conceal or push somebody in a state election, but it's a felony if you use the first misdemeanor to cover up the second misdemeanor. that doesn't sound right to some people. Why should 2 misdemeanors equal a felony? Why should 2 plus 2 equal 4? And the answer is because the New York State legislature says it does.
Yeah, well,
That's the law.
Yeah, I don't really even understand that objection, quite honestly. I mean, why should a third strike be worse than a second? Because it says so.
Because it says so, right? So, well, how do you prove it?
Maybe it's not a great idea.
Well, New York State law, another nuance. You don't have to prove it. New York State law says you only have to show the intent.
Yes.
And Stormy Daniels yesterday was all about intent because that's the story they didn't want known.
Yeah.
And David Pecker has already testified with his buddies that, and there was an actual scheme to do it with detail. And if you ask one person and then another person on another side of the scheme and then another person on another side of the scheme, they all tell the same story. So it's all internally
Many people
consistent.
were saying
And
it.
why? Because that's what actually happened.
That's usually the easiest way to get to that. The things that actually happened are the things that everybody witnessed and tells the same stories about, generally speaking. That's what juries tend to decide. Right. They don't have to, but they tend to.
And so, again, many of the same people that say this trial doesn't really matter are the same people who said there was a red wave, who said that, abortion issues have lost its salience. Just don't believe them. Look at the election
Trump is
results.
one of those people. Yeah, well, you should. This is, this trial matters about for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is now it looks like it's the only time he'll face criminal charges prior to the election, possibly.
Yeah, thanks to Elaine Cannon, that's true.
And two,
although in theory, because she said I'm not dealing with this trial, it does the trial schedule in no way, shape, or form interferes with what Judge Chutkan wants to do. So that's all up to the Supreme Court. If they actually rule someday, then that one could, in theory, take place.
That's certainly a possibility.
But certainly the Mar-a-Lago one is not.
Yes, that's true. It's possible that the other one gets underway. We gotta kind of cross your fingers and hope for it. But this one at least establishes that there will have been one. Yeah,
and then if the Supreme Court does ever rule, and I don't think they will because I don't think they want these trials. But if they ever ruled in a timely fashion, probably the Georgia one could take place too.
All right. Well, that would be great. I hope the dog doesn't eat their ruling.
There's no question. You're right. The Mar-a-Lago one is just not happening.
No. And this trial is also
Nothing. Is this worth recusal? You can't do that. Judges make their own schedule.
Yeah. Well, there'll be argument about it at some point. But she may turn around and say, well, I assume she'll make some sort of attempt at scheduling something and then just say, now, but I'm ready to schedule it, but now it's too close to the election, so I won't. But I was ready. I'm ready now, but I'm not doing it.
I'm not of the camp that she's deliberately trying to screw this election trial before the election. I'm of the camp that says that she's paralyzed because she's frightened because she's above her head and she really doesn't know what to do. Well, she literally doesn't know what to do when she takes stupid motions by the Trump attorneys at the same level as stealing national secrets, and I have to weigh them equally.
Although, gosh, it's so hard to even see that as like, well, I'm not sure.
What do I do? If I rule for the national security, which seems up, then I will deprive these lovely lawyers who are making a great case that the Federalists are whispering in my ear I should agree with. That, how do I balance that? I know I won't. If I don't decide, I haven't done anything wrong.
Well, we'll see. But but not anytime soon, certainly. And then, of course, if the election were to, or if the election were not to matter, for instance, like he loses the election horribly, but overthrows the government anyway,
or wins the election,
what are you going to do?
And then we
won't discuss that
because all laws canceled. Right. But in any case. So we have all of that. How does that play out politically?
I don't know.
We look at the primaries and we see Nikki Haley getting 20% everywhere. Here's another sign and portent, omens, knuckle bones, entrails, whatever you want to call it. This is the former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan of Georgia.
Wow.
Writing in the Atlanta Constitution. Why I'm voting for Biden and other Republicans should too.
All right.
Donald Trump has disqualified himself through his conduct and his character. What about that trial is going to make you change your mind after hearing Stormy Daniels. It's disappointing to watch an increasing number of Republicans fall in line behind former President Donald Trump. We know they will. They're into power. They don't really care about anything else. It just makes it clear. This includes some of his fiercest detractors, he writes, such as Mitch McConnell, Kristi Noem, Bill Barr. This mentality is dead wrong. Elections are a binary choice. Serious questions linger about President Biden's ability to serve until age 86. His progressive policies aren't to conservatives' liking. They're not really progressive policies, but if you ask a conservative, they are. So you have to understand that party's writing to a conservative audience. But the GOP will never rebuild until we move on from Trump. And then he goes on to make the case that you really need to vote for Biden. Other reluctant Trump supporters will cite their policy differences, like tax cuts. I get it. No one likes paying higher taxes, and these protests are unsettling. But the last year of the Trump presidency was hardly a time of tranquility. His handling of the pandemic was erratic, including at one point musing about consuming disinfectants. His reliance on incendiary phrases, such as when the looting starts, the shooting starts, fueled racial unrest. His infamous march to St. John's Episcopal Church across the street from the White House, flanked by top aides, including Bill Barr, and brandishing a Bible, further set the nation ablaze. Trump's shown us who he is. We should believe him. I remember that line. When somebody shows you who he is, believe him.
Yes.
To think he's going to change at the age of 77 is beyond improbable. So, vote for Biden.
All right.
Now, who does he represent?
What am I listening
Look,
to?
he may represent 5% of Republicans, but that's enough to lose an election if you're a Republican.
Right. So that may not dissuade him from trying to overthrow the government, but it's enough to lose an election.
Well, I'll
we'll
take
also then
losing the
defeat him.
election, and then let's see how
Yeah,
well.
and then
he
we'll
tries
just
to
beat him at
overthrow
the
government.
revolution.
I'll take that for 400, Alex.
Sure. I guess, I really don't have any choice in how you deal with this, but I gather, I don't know. How do you think things go for him? Nobody can guess this. How do things go for him legally? Should he run? One, be convicted in New York, run for election, lose the popular vote, lose the electoral vote, attempt something anyway to save his bacon, and then be defeated in that as well. And now post-election, post-second coup, let's say, what do we do with that guy? And I don't think we have a rule book for that one. So I don't know, but it's something to think about. That's something to do. We should be editorializing about that now so that there's a playbook in place. What do you do with a guy like that?
Yeah.
Historically, short outlook on life after that one.
So there's other things I think we should throw in there. I should throw in there just to make sure our listeners are up to date with what else is going on. That Republican primary in Indiana, that was one which Victoria Spartz was running. And she narrowly staved off a challenge, according to Playbook, from Chuck Goodrich, 39 to 33.
Got his own blimp.
Here are some names you may remember from back in the day. Former Representative Marlin Stutzman might be on his way back to Congress.
Nope. All right. Well, I'll try.
Because he's filling Jim Banks' seat, and Jim Banks is going to run for senator, I guess. And Senator
Indiana
Mike Brown,
is a blank slate.
Is that how he pronounces his name, Brown?
Who? Brown. Yeah, I think he does say Brown, but even though it's spelled like Braun.
Braun. Won an intense gubernatorial primary, 40% of the vote.
Oh.
So
Good, go away.
Banks moves on to run for governor, and then
I lost the track already. Yeah, all right.
Brown runs for senator.
He does. Oh, okay.
Spartz,
I thought he was moving to governor.
Before she was against, before she was against aid to Ukraine. She was born in Ukraine, by the way. The only one in Congress who was.
Wow.
She wins her challenge. John Hostetler.
Oh,
he tried to make a comeback, and he went down.
Wow. All right. Yeah, I do remember him. He was like exceptionally dull.
Yeah. But it's Indiana, so he had a chance.
Yes, that's true. That's kind of the brand. Hostetler. Wow. All right. That's been a while.
So Stutzman, Hostetler. I mean, what's happened to your father's GOP? Well, they're trying to run again. Why are they trying to run again? Because actually Trump is ostensibly the leader of the party, but there's still a lot of, I'm not comfortable with them stuff in the background. How much? Well, I would say 21.7% of Republicans, based on the primary results.
Yeah, that would tell us that. Man, I'm trying to think. There's definitely a story I used to have in my head about Hostetler, and it seems to me like it was one of those stories about, hey, I think he did one of those press conferences with, I have all these cuts, cutting waste, fraud, and abuse from the budget, and he brought some document that said, I have like $7 trillion in cuts, and someone was like, the whole budget is like $1 trillion. Oh, I don't know, something
well,
like.
I just used my giant scissors I brought as a prop to.
Yeah.
Cut
Well,
out.
so much for that.
And if you want to know how that works, all you have to do is watch A Night at the Opera and remember the Groucho Marx scene where he rips up the contract. The party of the first part shall be known as the part. I don't like it. Okay, let's just get rid of it. Party of the second part shall be known in this contract as the party of the second. I don't like it. Okay, just rip it out. Yeah. And then by the time you're done with your budget cuts, you don't have any cuts because you cut them all out.
Womp, womp. Okay.
That happens. So how does Congress really function? Well, Mike Johnson spent hours talking to Marjorie Taylor Greene yesterday, and
Holy
the word
mackerel.
is from
Poor
the people
guy.
in the know that Donald Trump was trying to mediate and tell Marjorie Taylor Greene not to put up a motion to vacate. But she wants to pretend she will because it's good for fundraising, so she's trying to drag this out. So they had an hours-long meeting, and they're supposed to have another hours-long meeting. Nothing's going to happen from it. It's done. As our friend John Stewart, the editorial board, writes, every one of these reporters knows the motion to vacate's dead. Hakeem Jeffries won't allow it. They know it's all theater. They know they're playing along, and then they go and they do a gaggle with 30 reporters hanging on MTG's every word because why?
I don't know.
They're also ignoring the fact, he writes, that this Congress will be the least productive Congress since the Civil War. So, why are they doing this? Why are they giving her the eyeballs that she's so sorely craving?
I don't know.
Because they're terrible.
Oh.
Our political reporters, they're just awful.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess she believes that the motion to vacate raises money. They believe that focusing on her raises money. So, I don't know. I guess it gets clicks, whatever, but still not entirely clear how clicks turn into money anyway. And if they knew, there wouldn't be so many layoffs, closures, and mergers. So, interesting. And yeah, I love that storyline, and we'll see how long she can continue to raise money for it. I guess Trump is just sort of half-heartedly trying to talk her out of it, but I don't know. It seems it's very interesting just that she's so into the Trump hero worship. I mean, it's her whole shtick, and then the guy makes a fairly clear demand, and I don't know, all of a sudden she doesn't care anymore. But that's MAGA.
It interferes with her raising money.
Yeah, I mean, and freedom, and I want to do what I want to do. And I don't know if they're clear on this whole authoritarian thing, lady, but, usually they make life difficult for you later. But, well, anyway.
So apparently Katie Fang is reading this. Judge McAfee in Georgia denied the defendant's motion to disqualify Fulton County DA Fonnie Willis, and the Georgia Court of Appeals has agreed to hear Trump's immediate appeal.
He has no immediate appeal.
I don't think he has any appeal, but, that's just me.
Yeah.
Other people feel differently, but they're into power and money.
Okay. We'll find out about how this one goes.
Or they see him as Samson. I can't tell.
I guess. I really just don't know what to make of that. But, there's no guessing how they'll interpret their Bible. They could go any way they want.
So let's see. Some other stories we had in the pundit round. Oh, Kristi Noem is still going on TV, still talking about that puppy.
Good. She's definitely going to turn a lot of opinion around soon.
Harry Enton pointed out, since Kristi Noem released snippets from her book, her chances of becoming Trump's VP have been slashed by 5/6 per the betting market.
Oh.
She seemed to not realize that dogs have an 88% favorable rating. The 12%
they all
must
go
be
to
cats.
heaven.
Everybody has pointed that out. But, how do you not love a puppy?
It's that's a standard political punchline, right? Somebody is so bad that I don't know, that you could or whatever, or that they'll do something so dumb. They'll tell people they kill puppies and still,
right.
Well, don't.
It's another idea about what's going on under the surface here for the November election, not the presidential, but the congressional.
Okay.
Particularly the Senate. This is from AP. Money isn't enough to smooth the path for Republican candidates hoping to retake the Senate. And they sort of go through case by case some of the really bad senatorial candidates they have. Frustrated by the seemingly endless cash flowing to Democrats, Republicans. Why is endless cash flowing to Democrats? Maybe because people are unhappy with Republicans.
Could be.
Republicans aiming to retake the Senate have rallied around candidates with plenty of their own money. The goal is to neutralize Democrats' roughly 2-to-1 financial advantage among the few bright spots for a party defending twice as many Senate seats as Republicans are. Mm-hmm. But it also risks elevating untested candidates who might not be prepared for the scrutiny. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. These Senate candidates from the GOP are being pressed on whether they actually live in the state.
Okay,
in Montana, the party's Senate candidate recently admitted lying about the circumstances of a gunshot wound he sustained in the armed services. And in Ohio,
well, maybe not.
Republican contender pitched himself as financially independent and now is asking donors to help repay the loans he made to the campaign.
Okay. Yeah, what I said was, I'm financially dependent on you.
Right.
That was a not an in. Sorry, you misheard me.
Yes.
Okay.
Dependent.
Who is this person whose photo is illustrating the?
I think that's Hovde.
Okay. Yes. That's right.
Eric Hovde from Wisconsin.
From the used car lot.
That really the guy that doesn't live there.
Okay. Well, I wouldn't either, but I don't know. But that's just because my house is here. Doesn't even live in. He's a Senate kid. He doesn't even live in Wisconsin.
Well, he's one of these guys that has like 8 houses.
I guess
including one in I think
ask
Mexico.
Me how many houses I own. Really? Okay. Well,
he was born in Madison and educated in Wisconsin, but
Mexico.
He just lives everywhere else. Then, of course, there's Dave McCormick. We know about him.
Do we?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because John Fetterman made fun of the fact that he's from New Jersey.
Okay.
But he's actually, for all I know, from Connecticut.
Oh, well, there you go. So you're in on this one too.
So you never know.
On the hook for this. Okay. Yeah, that is all right. Well, look, their Senate recruiting has been terrible for a long time, and there's always been a couple of candidates who are just really horrible and who blew it. Who if they had just had a standard nondescript candidate, Republicans would have won seats that they ended up losing to Democrats in the most unlikely of places because they just insist on, nominating the most strident, I guess.
Right. Now I'm going to mash a bunch of Kristi Noem appearances on TV together because they all blend together after a while.
All right. They're more or less the same.
I have this in the pundit roundup, and this one is pretty illustrative of what's going on here.
All right.
And she's on Newsmax.
Yuck. All right.
Okay. Newsmax. And I.J. Bailey writes, things are going bad for a Republican politician when they find themselves getting grilled on Newsmax.
It's hard to be grilled on Newsmax. They're usually
Newsmax hosts Profinity. If you asked me a month ago who's at the top of the list to run with Donald Trump, I would have said you. If you asked me that same question this morning, I don't even think you're on the list.
Wow.
I go on to ask about the puppy, and I don't know if it was on this particular interview or one that was just like him, but basically, I think it was with Stuart Varney, so it must have been Fox. And Varney is asking her about the
purple
puppy.
Dinosaur.
And she finally gets frustrated and said, I don't even know why you're asking me about the puppy. Just stop asking me about the puppy.
Well, I mean, I'm
not going to do this interview. You keep asking me about you keep going on TV so people can ask you about your book. And what's in the book? Something about the puppy. I mean, you can't imagine somebody less well prepared for this than her. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah, I can't.
She did that. This is all her own doing, and she's not prepared for it.
Sure.
And, if you're explaining you're losing, well, she goes in and apologizes like 8 different times. Last week I said 5, but then she did it another 3, and she keeps going on places. unfriendly places for Republicans like Newsmax and getting her head handed to her.
I don't quite get it. Yeah, that is gonna. I see here from the closed captioning here that they are grilling her on. Is this Newsmax? Yes, about the Kim Jong-un thing, which we didn't even really discuss that much, but I think everybody has kind of caught wind of that one. We've been focusing on the puppy, but apparently in her book she talks about in some detail about meeting Kim Jong-un, and
in the DMZ.
She didn't. She
Not
just
to
didn't.
be confused with TMZ.
Oh, okay. I didn't even realize that was there's no meeting Kim Jong-un for most Americans. Period.
Right.
In the DMZ,
But she wanted to make it credible,
No.
so she said it was in the DMZ. It's not like.
but
I
it's
went
not.
to-
It's even less credible.
Yeah.
As he's not going to the DMZ. To
Oh,
meet
isn't that where
anybody.
he met Trump once?
Yeah, it's
Something?
Trump, the once president of the United States. It's the one and only meeting between high officialdom in the United States and Kim Jong-un, period.
Which
and
was,
it was
a
staged at the
propaganda
DMZ.
bonanza
Yes.
for Kim Jong-un.
I mean, but that's
But she
like
lied about
saying
it. She
I
got
met
caught,
the
and she
queen
couldn't
at her
explain it.
coronation. Like, there's just not a lot of call for being at the coronation of the Queen of England,
Well,
especially
this
now
is
that
one
she's
of those.
dead.
Stop asking me about the puppy. Okay,
Yeah.
well, what about the story you made up about Kim Jong-un? So, what did you want to know about the puppy again?
Yeah, right. So this one was really amazing. But she had all kinds of detail in her book about how he totally underestimated her, and she flipped the script on him and really stood up
Why
to
didn't
him.
you just flat out say they all look the same to me, and I got confused?
I guess, but
Why don't
I
you
don't
just
think
say
she's
that?
even
Because
been
that's what
to.
happened.
I wonder when she's even been to the DMZ. I'm not 100%
And then
certain
it gets
that
even
happened.
better because she's got an audio book.
Yes, right. I read.
So then
I'm
she
caught by surprise
claims
by all
that
this.
it was the ghostwriter who did. I didn't even know. I never
Mm-hmm.
read the book. Well, you read it out loud. What do you mean you never read the book?
Yeah, right. I am fascinating. Look what I found out about myself when I read my own audiobook. It's pretty bad. And it's just, I don't know. It's one of those things where I guess Sarah Palin comes to mind again for a number of reasons, and not the least. Well, the main one being sometimes people can become governors of states with really tiny populations without any real rhyme or reason as to why it happened. It just, no one was running this time or whatever, or it happened. I got the nomination. You get the Republican nomination. It doesn't matter who you are or what you do. You are an unexamined person. It's okay because you're governor of a smallish state and there's just not a whole hell of a lot to do. But then you get the idea in your head, there's not a lot of states. There's only 50 of them, and being governor of one of them is kind of a big
Aren't there
deal.
53?
And yeah, right, sure. Just a little, throw in a couple extra just for fun, or accuse someone else of throwing in a couple extra. But yeah, it's just, I mean, it's hard not to take yourself seriously when you're the governor, even a governor of a small-ish state. But I guess, they just think they're going to make it. I've never read any of these books that people put out to, justify their run for president. In this case, for vice president. So I'm not sure whether it's the case with all of them, but having read the excerpts that people are circulating here, I've never read anyone that actually sounded so much like a cover letter for a resume before. Mm-hmm. But I imagine that's the theme of all of them. But they usually get writers to say, well, I'm also a fascinating person in my own right, and these are the things that make me a qualified candidate. But just every single episode in the book that was called out is like a stretch and a half to try to make it into a qualification for president. I believe she said that her qualification for staring down Kim Jong-un was that she had been a children's pastor at some point. And so that qualified her to deal with petty tyrants, as she said, which is, by the way, that's how she thought of your kids, fellow churchgoers. Petty tyrants. She hates your kids just as much as she hates the dogs, so watch out.
Don't near the kids. You know what she does with dogs.
Exactly. So I don't know. I've just never really seen anything quite like it before, but that just might be because I tend to avoid those books in general. But hers is a really super weak case, and the fact that it's falling apart so spectacularly, I don't know. I mean, I just wonder whether any of them ever wake up in a day, someday, and say, I'm really just in the wrong biz. This is just, I thought I was successful at this because there's no one standing in my way. There's 600,000, 700,000 people in this state. It's just not big enough to be a real test. I guess I was wrong about that. I mean, South Dakota's a real state and all, but really, shouldn't the people who are governor of bigger states be the ones running? I think so. Maybe I should just go back to the mall or something. It's sad.
Anyway, that's my story for today.
Okay, you can stick to that if you like. Tomorrow, we're back. The trial begins again. We won't know exactly what's happening because it won't have happened until our second segment.
Yeah, it's going to start around 9:30, and on cross-examination, they're going to try to make the case that she was extorting Trump, and then redirect, as they like to say, when the prosecution gets to ask questions again. They'll pick that argument apart. And hopefully, Stormy Daniels will contain herself and do yes/no questions. But what's done is done.
Maybe not. I don't know I don't know how damaging that really is.
She's not going to speak slower.
No.
Any more than I'm going to stop interrupting you. It just doesn't happen.
No.
You have a speech pattern. That's what it is.
I'll give you $130,000 if you slow down. How about that?
No.
All right. Well, I didn't have it in the first place. So good call there. You might as well just do your thing. So we'll join you again tomorrow for another look at what's happening in the trial and anything else that might happen along the way. I wanted to also mention you have done us all a great service once again.
By ending?
But yes, thank you very much. You shut up now and please get lost. Yes, but I guess bringing to the attention of the audience more than a couple of times the existence of Meyer Kahane and who he is and what he's about, because as it happens, yesterday in New York, someone they described as a pro-Israel counter-demonstrator, which I don't think is a proper description of any of the people, but Reuven Kahane is the guy who drove his car into some protesters in New York yesterday. And yes, a first cousin, once removed, I believe, but first cousin of Meyer Kahane. And I just made mention of Kahane and Kahanism again yesterday. And wow, timely, but you were the one who called out the Kahanis. So there you go.
The Kahanists.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Lots to wander off with here, but by the way, I notice on via Mastodon at the moment that Wonkette running with a good headline on the same things that Greg was pointing out about how Kristi Noem's day went yesterday. It was Kristi Noem taken to the gravel pit by, checks notes, Newsmax and Fox Business. Yes, and gets the Fox question mark there as well. Certainly seems to be the case. I don't know if we need to read their description of what happened. I think we got a pretty good view of it, but there you go. Bad day for Kristi Noem, and after having spent all that money to look like a Trump family member, it all goes to waste. All right. Well, I also mentioned as we were exiting that it was Greg who first, I think, invoked the name of Meyer Kahane in a bad way, because there's no other way to invoke the name of Meyer Kahane in our show content. I don't know. He's mentioned him a couple of times. And as it turns out, yesterday there was an ugly development in the New York protest scene. The Daily Beast's coverage is what I have at hand on this one. Driver charged, got to go back to the pocket version. Driver charged after allegedly hitting protester with car. And you don't want to hit a protester with anything, really, but well, some people do, and that's a problem. Anyway, Edith Olmsted is covering this, the breaking news intern over at the Daily Beast, and the word is, well, there are several words, and here they are. A group of protesters who gathered on Tuesday to urge Columbia University to divest from Israel, which is, I guess, the new way of referring to that group of protesters. Now that they're no longer an encampment, I guess. They're just a group that gathers to urge this. A group of protesters who gathered on Tuesday to urge Columbia University to divest from Israel said a man intentionally drove his car into their group, hospitalizing one person. And it doesn't sound like it was like a high-speed, gun it into a crowd to try to kill as many people as possible type attack. But still, people were injured. A car was used. It was intentional, it seems. And it's all the nightmare you could want, except that there's an additional layer to it. A group of about 25 protesters were picketing outside the home of one of the university's board of trustees on the Upper East Side on Tuesday morning, according to USA Today. And I haven't looked at their report on it, but it is linked in this. Police told the outlet that an argument broke out between protesters and a driver, and that as the protesters attempted to leave the area, the driver drove at the crowd, hitting one person. 3 people, including the driver and the injured protester, were arrested, police said. A spokesperson for the police department confirmed to the Daily Beast that the driver was 57-year-old Reuven Kahani. Mary Ellen Novak, 55, who was the one hit by the car, was also arrested for some reason, as well as another protester, 63-year-old John Rosendahl. So not students, and I suppose we should be thankful for that. I don't know exactly how this set up, but there it is, a protest outside the home of one of the Columbia University trustees, and populated by, outside agitators, I guess we would say. Unless, of course, the 57 and 63-year-old people involved here, 55, Mary Ellen Novak and John Rosendahl, I don't know whether they have connections to the university, whether they're professors, work there, no connection whatsoever, just live in the area. Doesn't really matter a great deal. This wasn't happening on the campus. So, if you're an outside agitator, good, because this was happening on the outside. Now, of course, I guess you could debate the propriety of protesting outside of someone's home, but that's a debate, we could have on another day. A press release from the Columbia University Apartheid Divest Student Organizing Group alleged that Kahani grabbed the protester's arm when they tried to hand him a flyer. Now, I think one of the other reports I read also detailed how Kahani has kind of been stalking the protests for some time. So he's clearly had in mind that he has a role of some sort to play here. He's been photographing himself among the crowd. He, in this case, took a flyer from a protester, but by driving up and lowering his window and asking for one of the flyers, show me what you're passing out. And then, I think he knew exactly what he was going to get. And then he grabbed the protester's arm and tried to drive away. And, that's an assault all by itself. He then moved to park across the street from the group of protesters. As they began to disperse, the group alleged, Kahani circled the block before plowing into the group of students, except he didn't hit any students, striking one de-escalator. They have a person there who's whose job it is supposedly to de-escalate when there is conflict. This de-escalator attempted to stop the car as it surged forward. After it struck the first student, another moved in front of the vehicle, forcing it to stop. The student who was struck, I guess there is, that's what's interesting, is a student who was struck. And then they say Mary Ellen Novak, 55. So maybe she is a student. She's just older than most students. Maybe a doctoral student. Maybe not. I guess it doesn't really matter. My assumption was that it wasn't a student because she was 55, but that assumption was ill-founded and wrong. Anyway, the student who was struck was also arrested, but was transported to the hospital where they were handcuffed to the bed because they're a huge flight risk. It's a very big danger that you might run away from. I don't know. There's really no reason for that, but that's what they do. The NYPD told the Daily Beast that Novak remains in the hospital where they're being treated for minor injuries. That's good news. Not that she remains in the hospital, but that the injuries are minor. Kahane has been charged with second-degree assault, the NYPD spokesperson said. Novak was charged with criminal mischief and unlawful assembly, while Rosendahl was charged with criminal mischief. On what basis? We don't know. Might it yet be dropped? Certainly possible. Last week, Columbia University sent hundreds of police officers into campus to forcibly clear out protesters occupying Hamilton Hall and protesting for divestment on the campus lawns. The same week, a mob of pro-Israel demonstrators descended on the encampment at UCLA, attempting to tear down their barricade, throwing bottles and fireworks into the encampment, plus even heavier and more dangerous things, as it turns out. On Monday, Hamas accepted a ceasefire deal proposed by Egypt and Qatar, which would have brought an end to Israel's violent military campaign in Gaza. Maybe, I guess. Well, a ceasefire presumably would, but I don't know that that deal was going to be agreed to by Israel. But it's one that Egypt wanted everybody to accept, and Hamas signaled that they were ready to accept it, but, you kind of have to have the agreement of both. At any rate, I think that's really about it. The rest of it is background information, which we're all pretty well aware of. But there you have it. Kahanism, I mentioned yesterday in discussing the problems inherent in trying to understand what, or maybe not even trying to understand, but simply label things as Zionism, that might be better described or better differentiated from this sort of all-encompassing and sometimes passively adopted idea of Zionism in general, i.e. just right down to the right of existence for a state of Israel, which, of course, there are some who disagree with, but the rhetorical tactic of turning all Zionism into conspiracy to murder seems to me, and what strikes a lot of other people who kind of come to the concept of Zionism from a very, very different angle and with a very different background, as overkill. But it is entirely true. We are also quite well aware that there are ultra-right-wing extremists and ultra-right-wing extremist versions of what sometimes even calls itself Zionism, but is probably better described as Kahanism, even though not everybody, and in fact very few people, I think generally speaking, are aware of what it's all about. But I made mention of it yesterday and have tried to, lay out the case for differentiating and using reference to Meyer Kahane, only to find out that by that afternoon, one of his cousins is involved in this attack on demonstrators. So, timely, I guess, if nothing else. Let's see, other items that I have put away for discussion. We also already hit on the surprising results from the Indiana primary, and I wanted to make mention, in fact, I've lost my access to Pocket here. Let's plug it back in. But yesterday, Patrick Snyder wanted to make sure that we had seen the results as they came in last night. He was watching Charles Gaba, everybody's good Twitter and social media friend, tracking the results. So thanks for pointing that out. And of course, it made it into Greg's roundup today. All right, let's see. Other items that we discussed included the strange, let's say, if not exactly inexplicable, certainly unbelievable, rulings in the Florida Jack Smith case, the documents phase of the case against Donald Trump before Eileen Cannon, and longtime listener and commentator via email, Christine on 16 sends us this piece from The Guardian with the helpful note that this is a late breaking in the day update from The Guardian on the Florida case. And let's read the background just so everybody knows exactly what was going on. We've kind of referred to it offhandedly. But judge scraps date for Trump Mar-a-Lago documents trial without rescheduling. That's the mechanical reality of where we are. Eileen Cannon, overseeing Trump's prosecution on charges of retaining classified files, says the case is not yet ready to take before a jury. And the reason for that, of course, that she hasn't made it ready to take before a jury. The federal judge overseeing Donald Trump's prosecution on charges of retaining classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago sex dungeon on Tuesday formally scrapped her scheduled May 20th trial date. It is, of course, May 8th right now, without setting a new date, ruling that the case was nowhere near ready to take before a jury in Florida. The fact that the original May trial date would not hold was a foregone conclusion and has been apparent since last year, given delays with pre-trial litigation and the number of unresolved legal issues that have only increased in recent months. The presiding U.S. District Court Judge Eileen Cannon set several new deadlines in a 5-page order, scrapping the trial date, seemingly in an effort to get the case back on track, but the drawn-out nature of the dates cast doubt on the likelihood of a trial before the election. In doing so, the judge played into Trump's overarching legal strategy, surprisingly enough, to seek indefinite delays for his criminal cases under the belief that winning re-election would enable him to appoint a loyalist as Attorney General who could direct prosecutors to drop the charges. The only silver lining for the special counsel Jack Smith, who brought the case, is that the federal judge overseeing Trump's criminal case in D.C., on charges that he conspired to overturn the 2020 election results, is free for now to schedule that case for trial in the summer. But the possibility of that case proceeding to trial before the election is also in doubt, since a trial date cannot be set until the U.S. Supreme Court rules on Trump's presidential immunity claim, and even then, Trump has roughly 3 more months of defense preparation time left on the clock. Trump's success in delaying his 2 federal criminal cases with pretrial motions and playing them off each other means the New York criminal trial, currently underway on charges that he falsified business records, may be the only case to go to trial before the election in November. As part of her order, Cannon issued a series of deadlines for only a handful of unresolved pretrial motions that sketched out a timetable into late July. The drawn-out timeline suggests that the case is now running more than 6 months behind schedule, with the original schedule having envisioned a May 20th trial date. Cannon, appointed by Trump in the waning days of his presidency, by the way, has generally given wide deference to Trump and his legal team, granting nearly all extensions that they've requested and entertaining his most brazen defense theories, even if they have been without precedent in Espionage Act cases. And I remind you, that's the authority on which he finds himself charged, the Espionage Act. The brazen defense theories mentioned here are outlined in a linked article from March of this year. The Mar-a-Lago judge is entertaining Trump's most brazen defenses. Hugo Lowell laying them out here, if you are interested in recapping them. We've probably discussed them all and, rolled our eyes at them, but they do exist. Where did we leave off? In an unusual move, Cannon allowed Trump to have a hearing about potentially dismissing the case based on accusations from Trump that the special counsel's office was illegally set up, and to have a 2-day hearing about who should be included as part of the prosecution team. Trump filed a motion in January asking Cannon to formally recognize almost all of the U.S. intelligence community and agencies to be considered part of the prosecution team, in a move that would inject months more delay into the process because it could entitle Trump to voluminous discovery. And in a notable delay, Cannon pushed back the deadline for Trump to give his notice under Section 5 of the Classified Information Procedures Act, CIPA, which governs how Espionage Act cases proceed to trial. about what classified documents he intended to introduce as evidence for the defense. Section 5 is considered the most important part of SIPA, which was enacted to protect the U.S. government from the practice of gray mail, where defendants threatened to disclose classified information into the public domain at trial, hoping prosecutors would prefer to drop the case. The process would involve Trump disclosing which classified documents found at Mar-a-Lago he wanted to use as part of a defense argument, but defendants trying to keep their trial defenses secret often provide too vague of a notice, which prosecutors then have to challenge in an appeals court. Trump's legal team told Cannon in recent weeks that they wanted their deadline to provide the Section 5 notice delayed until mid-June, until after they were done defending Trump in New York. Cannon obliged, moving the deadline to June 17th. So, anyway, more foot-dragging and delay tactics from Trump being rewarded by the judge that he appointed to the bench only in the closing days of his administration. Now, Christine also sent along this bit of Substack writing from Joyce Vance and an excerpt that has been sent along via email, but also a link to the full piece. I don't know how long this piece is. Is this worth racing through? Maybe. But the excerpt, I think, is meant to illustrate for us how Judge Chutkan in the D.C. case might be able to, A, move ahead with the trial, and B, might be able to use the move to trial to put some of the evidence that would be important in the Florida case, and we'd ordinarily wait for it to emerge in the Florida case. Is there a possibility of putting it on the record in the D.C. case? Let's see. Why not read all of how Joyce Vance sets this up? Presidential immunity. This is a piece from April 26th in which she writes, today, back then, we focus on Trump's appeal to the Supreme Court after Judge Chutkan denied his motion to dismiss the special counsel's election interference case, claiming, of course, that he had absolute immunity from criminal prosecution as a former president. It was a sobering experience, even with a court that has shown a propensity to abandon first principles, precedent, history, common sense, and the good of the American people when their political allegiances demand it. The outcome of this case is far from certain. The argument was disheartening. I had the interesting experience of commenting on the argument on location in the Senate swamp, which is across the street from the court. The Senate swamp site, as they like to call it, is just a common designated television and photography shooting area outside of the Senate side of the Capitol, one of the little grassy expanses on the grounds there. At any rate, the location came complete with a protester who loudly yelled fake news at us for several hours, a sign of the times. This is a court, she reminds us, that's concerned with future presidents and the rules that guide their conduct as much as they are with Trump. In fact, the argument was oddly devoid of mention of the former president by name, even though that's why they were there. Usually, an oral argument focuses on a defendant and his conduct. Not so here. This was all about future presidents and how they would execute their constitutional duties. The 6 conservative justices left Donald Trump on the periphery for the most part, with the possible exception of Justice Amy Coney Barrett. But make no mistake about it, the case is all about Donald Trump and whether he can be prosecuted for the most serious of his crimes against the American people, trying to hold on to power after losing the 2020 election. It's also about the legacy of the Roberts Court and whether history will view the already unpopular justices as the court that gave away democracy. The big question is why Clarence Thomas, whose wife was involved in January 6th, decided it was appropriate for him to participate in this case and why no one intervened. His presence on the bench was a blot on the court and the rule of law. We're forced to set that one aside for a moment. There is the possibility that he could be part of a 5-4 majority that gives the former president a reprieve from prosecution. After the dust cleared, it seemed that the three progressive justices, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson, and to a lesser extent perhaps Amy Coney Barrett, were interested in finding a path forward that would clear the way for prosecution, despite some early questions that suggested they weren't buying absolute immunity. As the argument developed, it became increasingly clear that Justices Alito, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh were all willing to throw Trump a lifeline in some shape or form. Kavanaugh dug in on a pro-Trump argument that says a former president can't be prosecuted under any statute that doesn't explicitly say the president can be prosecuted, an argument that has the effect of de facto immunity, since so few statutes do. Justice Gorsuch joined in to make the point that an obscure statute, 18 U.S. Code 1607, expressly provides for prosecuting the president. It reads in pertinent part, "It shall be unlawful for an individual who is an officer or employee of the federal government, including the president, vice president, and members of Congress, to solicit or receive a donation of money or other thing of value in connection with a federal, state, or local election while in any room or building." Really? Any room or building? The overwhelming majority of statutes don't, for the obvious reason that once a president leaves office, he's a private citizen and there's no need for the inclusion. But it became clear that this was a significant issue for several of the conservative justices who engaged in pearl clutching over how broad the statute Jack Smith used to charge Trump with conspiracy to defraud the government, that is 18 U.S. Code Section 371, actually is. The special counsel's office argued in its brief that Trump was not entitled to absolute immunity because that's really stupid and it doesn't exist. But they said specifically that even if there was some small scope of immunity for a president's official acts, it clearly didn't apply to Trump's conduct. Smith's office reasoned that that meant that applying first principles, the court should not decide issues that were unnecessary to resolve the case in front of it and should remand the case to Judge Chutkan for pretrial proceedings to recommence. That doesn't seem to be how this will go, although it can be notoriously difficult to read the tea leaves in oral argument, where the justices sometimes appear to be arguing a case as much as with each other and the litigants. One concession came from the Trump side early in the argument, with Trump lawyer John Sauer agreeing that there was no immunity for private acts committed by a former president while in office. The absolute immunity, they claim, is for official acts, not private ones. In this case, the distinction amounts to that between official acts taken by President Trump and private ones taken by candidate Trump. That is an approach that is appealing in some ways. The special counsel had argued in his brief, as a fallback position, that the indictment alleged sufficient private conduct to prosecute Trump on, even if they lost all of the official conduct. They maintained that they were entitled to use certain acts that the court might view as official, like the effort to subvert DOJ by appointing a new attorney general, or the pressure campaign on Mike Pence, as evidence of Trump's knowledge and or intent. They agreed today that if this happened, that is to say they agreed in late April, that the jury should get a limiting instruction telling them that they could not consider that evidence as part of the charges, but only as evidence of Trump's state of mind. After the briefs were in, that seemed like the special counsel's rock-bottom worst outcome in the case. Not ideal, but certainly a position that would let them proceed to trial with the scope of the charges narrowed, but still capturing significant criminal conduct. But after that argument in late April, it's clear that that isn't the worst outcome on the table. Early in the argument, Justice Sotomayor proposed the notion that a former president might get some limited immunity for official acts that were undertaken to protect the country, like Obama's anti-terrorism strikes, as opposed to Trump's actions, whose only beneficiary was himself. She pointed out that immunity means no prosecution for conduct committed for purely personal gain. That logical notion got no traction during argument. Even Justice Alito, at one point early on, suggested an objective test rather than absolute immunity. He questioned Sauer about his claim that immunity was essential to the functioning of the presidency, asking whether full immunity was really necessary, or whether he'd agree to a rule that allowed prosecution for official acts unless no plausible justification could be imagined. Sauer agreed that might be better than the distinction between official and private conduct, despite having conceded already that there was no immunity for private conduct. Of course, Alito's objective standard is in the eye of the beholder, and as slick as some of the justices have become, perhaps they could imagine a plausible justification for everything Trump has done, again bestowing de facto immunity. The one place where it appeared that Trump was likely to lose was on his argument that a former president must be impeached and convicted before he can be prosecuted for an official act. Although 5 votes might be there, we didn't hear that during that argument, but it wasn't smooth sailing for the government beyond that. All paths seemed to lead to the bad place. At what looked like a 4-4 split at one point with the vote of the Chief Justice, seemingly the only one is in play, and he's difficult to read. On the other hand, would he truly want to sign off as the last majority vote on an opinion like that one? Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. How shall we continue on here? Yeah, we were in the middle of reading through the Substack entry from Joyce Vance, and we're getting around to the point of why Christine sent us this piece along. I don't know. I just felt like it was probably a good reminder to read through the entirety of the Vance thing and kind of. I always find I read a excerpt and then I say, well, we really should have gotten more context for this excerpt. Although honestly, it was pretty well self-contained. But I wanted to sort of get a brief reminder on the record of exactly what's at stake here and what the Supreme Court is holding up and what they're taking so long to decide, because it's sort of important. Not only, I mean, it's an important case, but it's important to know how much is on the line and just how crazy some of the theories are that they're taking so long to decide, which really should have been decided in a flash the moment that they were asked. However, we were just reading up on this section about how the Chief Justice appeared to be in play here. And although he's difficult to read, there was this comment. On the one hand, would he truly want to sign off as the last majority vote on an opinion that would be so damaging to the rule of law that he always claimed to stand for? But on the other hand, he didn't take the strong stand for the rule of law and the executive branch's power of prosecution that you might expect if he was aligned there. For instance, while Justice Jackson opined that any conduct committed by candidate Trump could clearly be prosecuted, and it was essential to have a check on a criminal president or in the future, the Oval Office could be reduced to a hub for crime. Justice Gorsuch seemed more concerned with the possibility that prosecutors might abuse their power than the possibility of the White House becoming a hub for crime somehow. Michael Dreeben, arguing for the special counsel and the Justice Department, pointed out the pointed to the layers of checks on prosecutorial power, from the need to persuade a grand jury to indict, to the role of the trial judge in calling balls and strikes, to the decision of a jury, and on to the multi-tiered appellate process. But Gorsuch didn't seem interested. In fact, every time Dreeben tried to respond to questions that they asked him and began to score points, they seemingly lost interest, never permitting him to get in a full answer. He also argued presidents have access to extraordinarily good legal counsel from their attorney general, who could help them decide whether a course of action was legal before embarking on it, and are otherwise protected from abuse by judicial construction of statutes and the availability of defense, like one called public authority, being cut off before he could make his full argument. The Chief Justice was nowhere to be seen in any of this. The argument got way down into the legal weeds. One theme emerged: the likelihood that whatever the ultimate majority in the case looks like, it's very likely that it will involve crafting rules about the scope of immunity. That could mean sending the case back on remand, Sauer suggested to the trial court, for a decision about whether or not, on the facts of this case and given whatever rule the Supreme Court lands on, Trump is entitled to immunity. And that, of course, would take more time. Delay is a win for Trump, putting the case out of even theoretical reach for prosecution before voting starts, since Judge Chutkan has already told Trump that he has at least 81 days left. This is again in late April, 81 days on the clock for pretrial preparation after jurisdiction is restored to her. Now, here, the excerpt that Christine thought most important. We don't know for certain where Chief Justice Roberts is and how he will vote. But if this comes to a decision that some conduct does get immunity and the trial judge must make those rulings, there is one possible silver lining. Judge Chutkan could hold an evidentiary hearing on remand to facilitate her decision. That would mean briefs and even live testimony where the government would get to lay out all of its evidence against Trump. It's not a full trial followed by a jury verdict, but if this case isn't going to trial, it would be one way of getting more information about Donald Trump's conduct out for public consumption. The House January 6th committee and the hearings gripped the nation. The special counsel, with access to the powers of an investigative grand jury and the possibility of more cooperating witnesses, especially from other charged cases, would have an even larger story to tell. When it comes to delay, there was an interesting filing in Mar-a-Lago around that time, back in late April. Trump's lawyer, Chris Kise, notified the court that he would be out for surgery from April 29th through May 14th. His absence will likely delay the SEPA Section 5 proceedings over classified information and its use at trial. More delay. Sometimes delay is legitimate and unavoidable. Set your expectations accordingly. Near the end of the Supreme Court arguments, Justice Jackson put all the cards on the table, suggesting the court should just answer the question that they took the case on. Is a former president entitled to immunity for criminal acts committed while president? And if so, what is the scope of that immunity? It would be the right way to resolve the important question the nation faces. Sadly, it doesn't seem like where we're headed. Enormous thanks, though, she gives to those who support her writing through subscriptions. It's always a nice thing to do. I might remind you, for instance, that we would give you enormous thanks for supporting this work through subscriptions. And as a matter of fact, that's a great idea, because I happen to have handy a few names of supporters, re-uppers, boosters of their already existing pledges that we haven't yet mentioned. Although it occurs to me as I'm looking over the list, well, one of whom I do have noted that Mike D., who has recently boosted an already quite generous monthly supporting subscription via Patreon just a few days ago on May 2nd. But hearkening back to late April, about the time that this particular article that we were reading, as a matter of fact, was written, Ed Coble signs up as what appears to be a new subscriber via Patreon, but I feel almost certain, Ed, that we've seen your name and read it before. Maybe you were just switching the methods by which you've been supporting the program. And, well, we certainly appreciate it. And, hey, it's not a bad thing to thank someone twice or even 10 or 15 times for joining in support. And Mike Anderson, all the way back, we've missed our chances several times to mention it. Mike Anderson joins us as a supporter as well. Thank you, Mike. Back in late March 30th, joining the ranks of KITM monthly supporters. We appreciate it, as always. And I am admonished that we really do need to update, as always, those little breaks and those little announcements in which we encourage you to join us as a sponsor. It just, I don't know, every day after I finish the program, I'm just racing to get the podcast posted ASAP, and I don't want to hold things up to re-record, but I should be recording it after that one day. I don't know why I dread it so much, but I'd had to have a little conversation about it, and I was reminded that the now seemingly aged announcement about the supporters and how to become a subscriber supporter of the program mentioned that we had at one point been just north of 150 subscribers, and then it actually dipped a little bit, and then we had the progress report that brought us all the way back to 150 Patreon subscribers, and that it might be time to announce that. And then something happened somewhere along the line, and we fell again back below that number. So yeah, even there, I guess the celebratory, we made it to 150 subscribers thing would have been outdated just hours later, as it turns out. So we're sitting at 149 Patreon subscribers at the moment. Now could be a great time for someone to jump in, and I think you're going to have to bring 2 or 3 people with you. Just like in Congress, every once in a while, there's always circumstances that end up knocking the numbers down. You never know what's going to happen, even if it's somebody moving to a different platform sometimes. But look, formally, if we're trying to have 150 as a milestone, it's going to take 155 or so for us to remain reliably above 150. So bring your friends, why don't you? And please join in. All right, let's see. There's definitely more that I wanted to share with you about what's happening in the case. And I think, let's see, there's a couple of entries from Marcy Wheeler about this, and both appear to be, well, both, of course, as always, a risk in reading because, well, she tends to get a little bit weedy here on these things. But let's see, there's I think the latest entry here, which was circulated this morning, might be of some interest. How we got to a place where right-wingers cheer stealing nuclear documents. I guess even without reading all the way through the piece, I'll just let you know she was commenting on the latest developments down in the Florida case on Twitter, and found essentially in posting, Trump appointee bows to Trump demands, delays accountability for stealing nuclear documents. And she's just basically noting the fact that the trolls on Twitter either say, what do you mean by stealing nuclear documents? And either questioning, as is the Trump MO, you question every single piece of it. What do you mean stealing? What do you mean nuclear documents? And then, of course, when all of that falls apart, who cares anyway? It's a good thing that he steals nuclear documents because something reasons. And that's where we are. And worth pointing out that somehow conservatives have come around the usual biggest cheerleaders for the national security state, now no longer interested in national security because politics. So, I don't know. Seems worth pointing out, even if it doesn't really necessitate a read through all of the reasons that she lays out, or really more lays out a narrative of what the trolls have to say. And I guess I wouldn't want to give too much time to that at the moment. Unless, of course, the troll is Marjorie Taylor Greene, which leads me to I have more of an interest than Greg does in reading through the Politico reporting about what I guess I'm just sort of trying to learn the nuance of the disagreement between her and Trump, just given how much she's invested in the hero worship of Donald Trump. What does it mean inside the alleged brain of Marjorie Taylor Greene to find out that her hero stands in opposition to her biggest current personal project? I'm just sort of curious about that. Though the problem is, if you're looking for insight into the thinking of Marjorie Taylor Greene, there's none to be had. There's also no insight to be had, but there's no thinking going on either. Anyway, I do want to take a look at this piece here. Trump tries to privately mediate Johnson-Greene fight, according to Olivia Beavers and Jordan Carney, writing in Politico, and I believe Greg told us it was the Politico magazine. The former president had a lengthy phone call with the Georgia firebrand over the weekend, and again, too much positive spin for that one, telling her to stand down from her ouster threat, according to 3 Republicans familiar with the matter. Let's see. Trump is going further than just public statements supporting Speaker Mike Johnson. He's actually trying to mediate between the House GOP leader and Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. So far, it's unclear if the ex-president can convince one of his most loyal followers to back off her threat to force a vote ousting the speaker, even though it doesn't look like it's going to go anywhere. Trump and the Georgia firebrand, again, giving her too much credit, who speak often, had a lengthy phone call over the weekend, according to 3 Republicans familiar with the matter. Trump's message to her, per those people, stand down from the so-called motion to vacate. I have it under very, very good sources. From, maybe? That President Trump did engage, and I'm hoping that perhaps one would come to the conclusion, you made your point, said Representative Ryan Zinke. Oh, yeah, remember him? He used to be Interior Secretary under Trump, now back in Congress from Montana, citing a weekend discussion the former president had with Greene. But don't be kamikaze, because if you go for this, you're going to get beaten down. And he made that point. I'm hoping that's the outcome. Well, that's what Zinke had to say. Another Republican, granted anonymity for whatever reason, put it more bluntly. He told her not to do it. That's really nothing to hide from. Anyway, such messages fall in line with Trump's public remarks, where he's repeatedly praised the GOP leader and urged Greene not to trigger the vote. He's made those same comments at private events, according to one Republican with knowledge of his remarks. The president was very strong in his endorsement of Johnson at the RNC event this weekend. He repeatedly said what a good job Johnson is doing under impossible circumstances, said this Republican in attendance, granted anonymity as well. The president repeatedly said that we Republicans need to be unified heading into November. The Trump call preceded Greene meeting with Johnson on Monday afternoon, which lasted roughly 2 hours as they discussed a way forward. They were joined by Thomas Massie of Kentucky, who was the second House Republican to co-sponsor the ejection threat. Not that that makes any damn difference. Johnson and Greene are scheduled to meet again on Tuesday afternoons. That would have been yesterday, in what could be an off-ramp from Greene's ouster vote threat. I guess we should be looking for updates on that. The two are discussing multiple ideas, including trying to defund Special Counsel Jack Smith. I guess I did see that she issued a list of demands of some sort yesterday, which included that, right, defunding the special counsel's office, and also insisted on no more funding for Ukraine, among other things. But trying to defund Special Counsel Jack Smith, a proposal that is likely to spark pushback from other corners of the GOP conference, as it could risk a shutdown shortly before the November election, as well as deals on spending. But Johnson stressed on Tuesday that it's not a negotiation and that he was just listening to ideas from Greene and Massie. That's nice of him. Trump's back-channeling has extended to Johnson as well. The speaker said that he also spoke with Trump on Monday, loves calling people on the phone, and that the former president had his back on Greene's threats. He's not in favor of it, Johnson told reporters, adding that Trump did not call into his Monday meeting with Greene and Massey. Despite Trump's pushback, Greene has defended her decision to press forward with a referendum on his speakership, arguing that she and not Johnson is the GOP member actually fighting for the policies that Trump supports. But Trump has brainworms too, so too bad. Anyway, she's also acknowledged that she's spoken with Trump on the vacate effort while declining to detail their conversations. I fight harder for President Trump in Washington, D.C. than anybody, Greene said in an interview Tuesday with Steve Bannon. But everybody is trying to pretend like there's a problem between us, and I'm going to tell you right now there is not. But even some of Johnson's critics have acknowledged that Trump's backing has added an extra layer of protection for the speaker, and at least for now helped deflate Greene's ouster threat. Other Republicans have privately warned that Greene is risking political blowback, testing the boundaries of a GOP presidential nominee who doesn't typically take kindly to defiance. Trump allies who oppose her effort, however, also argue Trump so far doesn't see this as rising to the level of disloyalty. As Johnson heads into a second meeting with Greene and Massey Tuesday, Republicans are gently warning the speaker against boxing himself in with these hardliners. They argue the clearest warning is his predecessor, Kevin McCarthy, of course, who agreed to multiple huge concessions in January of 2023 in order to win the House gavel. I don't have a problem with him listening. What I have a problem with is when you start making special deals, side deals, hidden deals, behind the closed door deals. And then not just conservatives, but moderates say, well, what about my deal? Said Republican Study Committee Chair Kevin Hern of Oklahoma. That's how we got into trouble in 2023, January, echoed centrist Don Bacon. Centrist, really? We gave away way too much, and I think we're paying for it right now, so I would be very careful in negotiating with her. You shouldn't negotiate anything with her. Johnson acknowledged during a closed-door conference meeting on Tuesday morning that he was meeting with Greene and Massey, but Johnson said he told members that he was only hearing them out, something he frequently does for Republicans who wanted to speak with him, regardless of their ideology. Again, it is not a negotiation. He said, everybody knows I have lengthy discussions, detailed discussions with members across the conference. So that's an interesting way of putting it and a reasonable position to take. I'm not negotiating with her. I'm just listening to this very, very dumb idea, as sometimes happens. So there was this list of demands issued yesterday. I wonder if we might be able to come up with them if we search around for a little bit and see if there's any news on the subject. Well, let's see. ABC, AP. And so what's the latest on this one? Oh, that's an interesting addition to things. But yesterday, I guess we basically have, after the meeting, the AP News report. We could read that one, let's say. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene and Speaker Johnson search for off-ramp as vote on his ouster simmers. I don't know if this really adds much to it, but does this acknowledge the list of demands at any point? I don't think so. Although it might mention, let's see. Not really. So interesting that really hasn't garnered that much attention from reporters on this. However, there is something new from Politico here. Perhaps we can add this to the mix. An opinion piece from Brendan Buck, who has served as advisor to House Speakers John Boehner and Paul Ryan, apparently. And he writes that it's time to isolate Marjorie Taylor Greene and her chaotic comrades. A bipartisan pact, he says, is needed to begin to fix the House. Well, we'll see. Let's take a peek at what he's got in store here just for I guess we can wrap things up with this as a cornerstone here. The Speaker of the House is a big job, yet a small group of deeply unserious people has consumed an inordinate and growing amount of the Speaker's time over the last 12 years. So speakers of all kinds and both parties, I guess. Not really. It's not that the deeply unserious people who are... they've made problems for Democratic speakers, but not really necessarily consumed their time in the same way that they consumed the time of Republican speakers. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene has given us fresh evidence of that this week as she threatened to pull the trigger on a vote to oust Speaker Mike Johnson, only to de-escalate, at least temporarily, after multiple meetings with him. But the standoff, for all its foolishness, gives the House a chance to reverse this drift and serve as a turning point toward becoming a more deliberative body once again. Over the House's more than 2 centuries, there has no doubt been all manner of cranks and questionable characters serving in the institution. It is a modern phenomenon, however, that we pay them so much attention. Maybe that we have the platforms to do so is the difference. Today, congressional politics revolve around a rump group of lawmakers who typically hold no significant role on committees, have often served just a few terms, and whose rhetoric implies only a tenuous grasp of political reality. We must stop taking them so seriously. We need a bipartisan pact that we're going to stop letting the people who delight in the absurd have an outsized influence in the House. It would be good for the institution, good for Republicans, and even good for Democrats. Both parties have their gadflies and their fringes, but the reality is that the forces fueling historical levels of congressional dysfunction are coming from a small but growing group of Republican hardliners, and it's infected the culture of the broader House GOP. I've seen that up close, having previously served as an advisor to Speakers John Boehner and Paul Ryan. Lately, Greene has accused Johnson, a conservative derided by the left as MAGA Mike, of literally being a Democrat. She's among a swath of Republicans who insist a tiny House majority can foist a conservative agenda upon a Senate and White House controlled by Democrats. Similar nonsense was thrown at Johnson's predecessors whenever they would strike a necessary bipartisan agreement. Republicans have indulged this ridiculous thinking for too long. Indeed, doing so has only emboldened the hardliners from one speakership to the next. Boehner could barely tolerate many members of the Freedom Caucus, and he did little to hide it. Ryan believed a dash of inclusivity and an open line of communication would moderate their worst instincts, and he held a weekly lunch with members from different pockets of the conference, including Freedom Caucus leaders. Kevin McCarthy went so far as to give the chair of the Freedom Caucus a seat at the leadership table. No matter the approach, the threats from the far right have never subsided. That's a good point. Johnson similarly spent much of his first 6 months in office chasing around their unrealistic demands until he, surprising many, decided to pass a domestic funding agreement and a large foreign aid package with broad bipartisan support. Greene's threat to try to boot Johnson, using the motion to vacate, is the latest turn in a cycle that makes the House a miserable place to serve. That's why this moment offers an opportunity for both parties to begin to fix the House. Democrats have already pledged the votes needed to protect Johnson, but only once. If Greene does reverse herself and force a vote against the Speaker, he should be prepared to go further than just defeating it. He should call another vote to change the House rules so that one member alone cannot trigger the motion to vacate. This will require Democratic help, but it can be presented as a commitment to govern honestly rather than continually at the mercy of Greene or others operating on bad faith. Similarly, if hardliners keep defeating procedural votes on the floor, as they have in record number this year, Johnson should normalize the practice of bipartisan rules, again, working with Democrats to effectively govern the floor if he must. Look, I've offered a path to that too, right? For the balance of this Congress, if you can't see it happening again in the next Congress, but for the balance of this Congress, make the Rules Committee an evenly divided panel. Appoint more Democrats. Dilute the influence of the Freedom Caucus. What people like Greene crave more than anything is attention, and the motion to vacate is their most potent tool for commanding it. It is the weapon that has, even in quieter times, hovered over the thinking of 4 straight GOP speakers. When that weapon is taken away, there is a completely different equation for leadership, allowing for rational decision-making about what is best for the Republican conference and the House. Of course, taking away the motion to vacate does not solve all the Speaker's troubles, as we've seen in spectacular fashion in this Congress. Hardliners can still make it difficult to bring bills up for a vote, and they will still be able to raise money and play to the conservative media in ways that undermine their colleagues. That is why this is not a problem that leadership alone can address. The rank and file, too, must not tolerate criticism that defies the obvious realities of divided government. There is a cultural peculiarity in the House GOP where it is almost taboo to say out loud that a conservative priority is not immediately achievable. Even behind closed doors, a few words are devoted to what can reasonably be attained. Everything must be grounded in a fight for the maximalist position, and wherever conservatives foil a more realistic plan, they do so with impunity. Change starts with a shift in culture in the House GOP conference. It must be okay to say true things, like that hardliners are making policy outcomes less conservative, not more, by refusing to back their own speaker. That's certainly true. As we have seen, change also requires cooperation from Democrats. It is reasonable for the minority party to question why they should be in the business of protecting a Republican speaker from conservative hardliners. We should not pretend that Democrats' primary goal isn't to take back the House, and it is fair to believe that continued chaos in the GOP majority sends a signal that if it's not a party capable of governing, then maybe they ought to be replaced. At the same time, there is also little evidence that these leadership fights break through with voters, especially by the time they go to the polls. What's more, should Democrats take back the House, it's entirely possible they too will have a tiny majority. Given how few competitive districts we now have, Democrats aren't immune from party infighting, and it would be good for the whole House if both parties commit to rewarding sanity, not hijinks. That, I think, will be our last word from him on this one, though there is more, and I think that's where he first missteps. It's not the same in the Democratic Party. Nancy Pelosi has done it already.
You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
By all accounts, Hakeem Jeffries is able to command his troops just as effectively, so you should probably point that out. All right, time now, though, for us to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and as usual, he has collected a number of stories we haven't found time and 2 hours to get to, so do stay tuned for that, and we'll see you tomorrow.